New York City this morning, day 3 after the terrorist attack on America. The rescue effort back on after being suspended because of thunderstorms that rolled through here. Thousands of people are missing, and Americans are desperately trying to find their loved ones. And the New York borough of Brooklyn shedding some light on the pain the country is feeling. This is CNN's continuing coverage of America Under Attack. I'm Paula Zahn reporting from New York this morning. Thank you very much for joining us. Miles O'Brien will be joining us a little bit later on from the CNN Center in Atlanta. Here are the latest developments in America Under Attack. Searchers at the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia have recovered both of the so-called black boxes from the jetliner that crashed into the U.S. military headquarters on Tuesday. The flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder were recovered overnight, and their contents will be analyzed. Members of the U.S. Coast Guard boarded a Carnival Cruise Line ship off the coast of Miami this morning and took 2 people into custody. Authorities claim the 2 have what they call a history of hijacking, but it is not clear if there is any direct connection to Tuesday's attacks. The 2 people will be questioned by FBI agents. CNN has obtained this photo showing a fireman and other people in a stairwell and one of the World Trade Center fires on Tuesday. It is believed that the photo was taken as people tried to get out of the building after the jet hit it. And this is a day of mourning, not only here in the United States, but also in Europe. Nations across the continent observed 3 minutes of silence this morning for victims of Tuesday's attacks. Let's pause for a moment. We were just looking at a picture of the House of Commons from London earlier today. Citizens of 31 nations worked in the World Trade Center in New York, and many of those people are among the missing. Just a quick recap here this morning on what's going on in Manhattan. I mentioned a little bit earlier on. We'll try to get a shot up of the continuing rescue efforts down there, but they were suspended for several hours because of a thunderstorm that rolled through here. Great concern that the towering cranes that are being used in the cleanup effort could get hit by lightning. There are going to be spotty showers all throughout the day. We are told, as I just said, that the rescue efforts are back up in a more limited way than they were at full bore yesterday. All airports here remain closed indefinitely. As you know, the city is getting prepared for President Bush to visit here later today. The city is confirming that some 5,000 people are reported missing or confirmed dead near the World Trade Center. Right now, I wanted to check in with Deborah Fabric, who joins us from the Manhattan Armory. This is the place where I think most of New York has witnessed some of the harshest heartbreak. Deborah, what's going on there right now?
Well, Paula, right now, very rainy morning here in the city. Not too many people showing up yet, but this is the Armory. This is where mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, husbands and wives have been coming in. They are filling out missing persons reports, about an 8-page questionnaire, all filled with details of their loved ones that are now missing. As you approach the Armory, just to give you a sense of what it is like, the entire area is basically plastered with these kinds of photos all over the place, snapshots of the people who are missing. This man here, John Scharf, he is 29 years old, 6'3". It lists identifying tattoos, an eagle with an American flag. Over here, Brooke Jackman. She was last heard from 9/11/01. She was on the 104th floor of Cantor Fitzgerald. A little saying here, it says, worried, sick. These are all of the details of people who simply have not been heard from since this blast took place. Now, yesterday, this area was packed with hundreds of people. They came here to get whatever information they possibly could on the folks that are missing. There are 2 lists that are located here at the Armory. One has names of people at local area hospitals. The people who are showing up here have been going hospital by hospital by hospital, trying to get information, hoping that perhaps their loved ones may simply be unconscious, not in a state to have filed reports as to where they are. There's also a second list. That list has the names of the dead. I want to speak to this man over here. His name is Janie Cobb. Kaaba. His brother, Mohammed Jawara, was a security guard at the World Trade Center at Windows on the World. He showed up for an 8 o'clock shift. He has been frantically calling the cell phone, his pager, and has heard no information yet. You have come to the Armory this morning. What kind of information do you hope to get here?
I just want to know where he is, and if he is alive, we want to know that because we have no any information about him since last Monday.
Have you heard anything from Windows on the World, from the personnel there?
Yeah, they gave us some information on 800 numbers, but we keep calling that number. The number is busy, no one is answering us, so we couldn't get through to it.
Okay, and yesterday you told me that there were so many people that you got discouraged. That's why you're here already. Well, you were here since what time in the morning?
I'm here since 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm trying to get it earlier because yesterday I couldn't get through to do anything about it.
All right, thank you very much. We appreciate your joining us this morning. And just, Paula, to show you a little more of what's going on here. Again, all of these pictures, just life, a happier time before this all happened. And, you know, some are duplicates. Here we have a wedding photo, a young man, Craig Staub. Here you have a father with his children, and it says, "Hurry home, Daddy." Also, please keep the faith. And, you know, you wonder in all these pictures, which of them might still be alive, which may be buried in the rubble. There is a sign here that really sums it up. It says, "Anything is possible when you believe." Paula?
And Deborah, I know that many of the rescue workers and paramedics you have talked to have said the same thing when I've talked with them, which is basically they're not giving up hope. They have the reason to believe there may be some people still trapped inside the wreckage, and that's why those rescue efforts continue in earnest this morning. Thanks so much. Joining us right now is Jill Gartenberg, who is among the many thousands of Americans who still aren't clear on what has happened to loved ones. Welcome, Jill.
Thank you
very much for joining us.
Thank you.
You're missing your husband. Tell us
Right.
a little bit about what happened on Tuesday.
Went to go to work, said goodbye to my daughter and myself, probably for the last time. Called my office. I got to my office probably 2 minutes after he left his first message on my machine saying there was a fire in his building on his floor. He didn't know if he was going to make it. I then spoke to him numerous times, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 times, up until about 10 a.m.
What was he telling you during those phone calls?
Mostly that he loves me and he loves my daughter, who's 2.5. And that he's there with one other woman in his office, Patricia, and it was just the two of them who were there, and that they were stuck on the 86th floor because there was debris and smoke and fire outside of their offices, so they couldn't go anywhere. They couldn't get to a stairwell.
But after the last phone call he made to you, he also made other phone calls.
He
Who
made
did he
numerous
talk
phone
to
calls.
after that?
Friends and his mom and his sister. He called friends. He has friends all over the country. He called, I mean, when I went to call his friends later on in the afternoon, most of them had spoken to him. He was obviously very busy on the phone. He was on his cell phone and on the phones in the offices which were working. He was on the phone a lot with, his company was Julian Studley, and he was on the phone with the Midtown office a lot, and they were providing a lot of support for him and, you know, kind of giving him ideas of what to do and what one needs to do and has to do in a crisis like that.
When is the last contact anybody had with him?
I don't know if it was me or somebody else. It was, I think, a little before 10, and when I spoke to him, he said that it was getting a little smokier. And I said, well, just stay down, because, you know, I don't know what else to tell him. And he said he was trying to, but the phones kept ringing. And he wanted to stay by the door, because in case somebody did come to save them, you know, he wanted to stay by the door. So I don't know if I was the last one he spoke to.
But in your last phone call, he still seemed hopeful?
He was,
could
the
get out
whole
of there.
time, he was very calm. I mean, he's just this kind of person who, in any crisis situation, obviously, what's worse than this, he was very calm. I mean, he really was very calm.
Do you have reason to believe he ever got off that floor?
No, I don't, because I didn't speak to him that much more. I mean, I think his One World Trade collapsed around 10:30, and I don't remember exactly the timing, what time I spoke to him, but there's no way. I mean, he spoke to 911, and he spoke to his office, you know, his other offices, and everybody told him to stay put. There was no place for him to go. He couldn't get to a stairwell because of the smoke and the fire and the debris. He couldn't get anywhere else. So when somebody tells you what to do, you do it in that kind of situation, and then it collapsed.
Jill, I know this will be tough for you to listen to, but we have heard of so many phone calls that were made from victims to family members, and we do have some audio of one of those phone calls that we'd like to listen into right now.
Messages. Tuesday, 8:48 a.m.
Jill, there's a fire on my floor. I love you, Jill. Everyone, I love you. I don't know if I'm going to be okay here. I love you so much.
I guess I find it so hard to believe that anyone even had the presence of mind to make phone calls like that at a time when they knew.
Right,
things
that
were
was
very,
my
very
husband.
bad.
That was my husband calling me. That was actually the very first message he left for me when he didn't know. Of course, I don't think he ever knew it was terrorism. You know, he said he called me back subsequently and told me a plane had crashed into the building, which isn't so crazy in the World Trade Center. You know, I suppose I didn't think terrorism at all, and. Subsequent phone calls, he was very calm. That was the initial phone call, and then, you know, following that, he sounded so calm, and he said, you know, we're going to be okay here. Called ABC News, and he spoke with them on the phone. And, you know, you can hear, I didn't hear his voice, but a lot of people called in and said that they heard it, and that he was saying that he was going to be okay and tell loved ones that they were going to be okay and they were safe on the 86th floor.
You have some pictures of your husband you
Yes.
brought along that you'd like to show everybody
Yes.
this morning. These are pictures taken during obviously much happier times. If you would just hold them up, or actually I'll help you hold them up
Okay.
right here. Tell us a little bit about your daughter and her understanding or lack of understanding of anything going on right now.
My daughter's, Nicole, is 2.5 years old, and she, you know, was full of life just like him. You know, he enjoyed life. He enjoyed every day of life. And he did it with her and with me and with the rest of his family and friends. That was all important to him. And, you know, she just loved seeing her daddy. And, you know, she's asked where her daddy is. And I said he's not coming home, you know. She can't understand any more than that. And I don't think she can even understand that, you know, because a lot, you know, he's a hard worker and he works late and he leaves early in the morning. So I don't think she understands that he's really not coming home.
The trauma of this is so difficult for anyone to bear, but you're also pregnant right now.
Right.
Are you doing okay physically?
Yeah, I guess as good as can be expected. I'm 3.5 months pregnant, and I think it's important for my daughter to have, you know, a sibling and family, since she probably is not going to have her daddy.
I know you told me earlier on this morning how gratified you've been by the outpouring of support that you've gotten from people in the city. Before we let you go, tell us a little bit about that, because there are so many other families that find themselves in this same horrific state of unrest. And in your case, you don't have limbo, but there are thousands of families that do.
Right, right. I've obviously watched other interviews of other people, and I say, God, I feel bad for them, but wait, I feel bad for me. And I went to a temple, at my temple, Sharet Tefillah. They had a special service held the other night. And they had, the rabbi asked people to go around and say who they had on their minds, who was missing. And I stood up and had my daughter in my arms and said, my husband and her daddy, Jim Gartenberg. And, you know, everybody, you know, just felt for me. And after that, people came up to me and said, I don't know you, but I want to give you a hug. And it was just, the support was overwhelming. And family and friends, I mean, people I haven't heard from in so many years, you know, just hear about it, you know, just to feel for me.
Well, we are so sorry, and our collective hearts go out to you and your family as you work your way through this. And Jill, right now on the screen, what I wanted to put up for our audience is a website address for folks who are missing family members, who, as you may know, there are thousands of people in the hospitals, area hospitals around here, many of whom have not been identified, who are fully expected someday to get out of the hospital. So if you have a picture of a loved one that the city has not been able to make any sort of contact with, please download a picture to this address, and CNN will do what it can to assist you in this process. That address, missing@cnn.com. Again, Jill, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So right now, Miles O'Brien is going to join us from Atlanta. Miles, I wanted to share with you a scene that seems to be repeated throughout the city. One of our producers last night was walking through the Grand Central Terminal to catch a train, and all of a sudden he saw that thousands of his colleagues and fellow New Yorkers started to clap, and he looked around him, and as he turned over his right shoulder, he noticed that there were 10 firefighters who had walked into the terminal, and I guess the applause grew louder and louder as people realized they were there, and at one point one of the firefighters doffed his helmet to the crowd as they exited the terminal to the echoing applause. And you know, Jill's story, unfortunately, is being repeated throughout this city, but the one thing that has hit a completely raw nerve here is the loss of at least more than 300 firefighters, and we are told now maybe as many as 100 police officers. And the city is doing what it can to honor those that continue to assist in this horrible, horrible effort.
Indeed, Paula. Speaking of that, there are more than 1,000 people at Ground Zero attempting rescue and salvage efforts, continuing with some hope that perhaps some survivors might be found beneath the rubble. It was a difficult night, to say the least. Already, of course, an incredibly difficult challenge, but the weather did not cooperate. A series of electrical storms came through New York overnight, forcing those workers to cease and desist for a little while. CNN's Martin Savage has been monitoring the situation there. He joins us from Lower Manhattan. Martin?
Morning to you, Miles. We are in the area of Reed and Greenwich Street. For those who are outside of New York and aren't familiar with the area, we are about 2 blocks away from Ground Zero. It would be in the background here, just down this street here. The important thing at the moment is the volunteers. This is basically shift change that is taking place. The night shift coming off, the day shift beginning to go in. 2 workers who have been working through the night, working through this bad weather that they've been having, are Helen Nolan and Lou Ferraro, and they join us this morning. Good morning to both of you. What has been going on overnight, Helen?
Not very much with the weather. They've been using the heavy equipment, and the firemen couldn't go in really and sift through the rubble, but they're trying to do their best to get, you know, to the towers to see where the people, maybe survivors or remains, but not very much last night because of the weather. So,
Lou, has there been any sign, anything you know of regarding survivors?
Actually, they kept us back as the ironworkers were working because they were working with the heavy equipment. We've heard rumors of people hearing knocking and such things as that, but from where we were, we don't know. And we've gotten to a point by hand that the only way to, the next level is the heavy equipment. So, you know, it's very frustrating standing there waiting to go back in when you can't. So.
You were describing to us the use of buckets and how instead of the heavy equipment that's going in now, it was almost work by hand. How did that go?
We followed the fire department's lead. Everything was behind the fire department. They knew what they were doing. We would make a chain in and out of piles, whichever area we were supposed to work. One line of people for buckets going in, and then they would fill them up with rubble, debris, whatever, and another line going out into a pile. Then they would pick it up into a truck and take it away. They were trying to do as little small pieces as possible to see what they were picking up. They had to look at every little thing, but as fast as possible. Until, like I said, they had to get the heavy equipment in, at which time they moved us out.
Helen, you're an emergency medical technician by training. You work for the city. You've obviously seen bad things. How does it compare to what you see now?
This is like nothing I've ever thought I actually would see. There's no words to describe it. I just, you know, my heart goes out to the families. I have to say the Red Cross and the volunteers are doing a great job. They have food there all night. The firemen are exhausted and they're continuously working. The police department, everybody. I mean, everybody is just doing a magnificent job. And even New Yorkers themselves are going out of their way to be nice. I mean, they're waving and, you know, thanking people on their way home and applauding, and it's just, it's great. But definitely shock and disbelief. I mean, I never thought I'd see anything like this, you know, ever.
You've been working straight through since Tuesday.
Yeah.
You go home now and you have your own family. What will you do?
I'll hug my son when I go in the door, and to be honest, I don't really know. It's just, it's very difficult to readjust to your own family life, you know. I mean, after seeing the carnage down here, it's just, it's very difficult to do. So, call my family in Ireland more than anything, but so.
Lou, what do you normally do when you're not here, obviously?
I run my own business. I sell beverages. That's what got me down here. I donated a couple of pallets of water, and I asked if I could help a couple of days ago, and they were looking for all the help, you know, they could possibly get. So I've stayed. I'm going to go home. Like, I have 3 children, spend the day with them, sleep a little bit, and come back at like 3 o'clock and do it all over again.
Why did you feel that you had to go beyond donating to actually getting in there?
Something told me I had to be here. I'm sure with the amount of people that are lost, it's people I know, and even if not, I mean, it's unbelievable. I was just talking to a gentleman, a police officer from Utah. They've been driving 38 hours straight, Chicago, all over the country. Everybody needs to be here. It's for all of us. It's for my kids, and that's why I'm here.
Lou, Helen, thank you very much. Thank you for your work as well. There are officers and volunteers that have come from all over. We were just through a checkpoint.
All right, that was CNN's Martin Savage in Lower Manhattan. We apologize for the problems with audio and the technical issues there, but we have inclement weather, which is bedeviling the technology this morning. Moving on this morning, where are we headed? All right. Meanwhile, the investigation of the crimes is hitting full stride, and here in the U.S. and around the world. Our national correspondent, Eileen O'Connor, joining us from Washington with the latest on that aspect of this story. Eileen.
Well, Miles, it is very important that the investigators try to find out who the people who were involved in that, because they do believe that they perhaps have not caught all of the people, or that all of the people involved were not, of course, killed as the hijackers, and there could be still other people out there with other plans. And what we know is at least 8 people were arrested and detained for questioning at 2 New York airports yesterday. 4 of those people had tried to board a flight on Tuesday and were confronted and quickly left because of a watch list that's been distributed to airport personnel. Now, these same people were picked up when they came again yesterday. They had open tickets. One of the total group picked up had false identification as a pilot. And the investigation, as you said, is in full swing all across the country, with federal authorities searching homes and hotels where they believe the people involved in the plot may have stayed over the last week. That includes areas in Virginia, also in Maine, and as well as Newark and in Florida. One person that is being seen increasingly as a linchpin in all of this, where a lot of connections are going through, is Mohammed Atta. He was listed on American Flight 11, according to federal law enforcement sources. That was a flight from New York to Los Angeles. And that was the one that went into the first World Trade Center tower. He and another associate, Marwan Al-Shari, attended 2 different flight schools in Florida. A third man, possibly a cousin of Al-Shari, named Waleed Al-Shari, was listed as well on Flight 11, according to official documents from New York. Now, this is the first plane that flew into the World Trade Center, as I've said. Now, that cousin also attended a flight school, a different flight school in Florida. Federal law enforcement sources say that they traced their track all the way back to Hamburg. Yesterday, we had several arrests in Hamburg. German authorities say that they know that Mohammed Atta used to live in Hamburg with Marwan Al-Shari and a third individual, and that they were associated with a terror group. One of the people arrested in Hamburg yesterday was an airport worker. German authorities say they are still looking for others that may have been associated with this group. And again, police are on the lookout. Law enforcement authorities, airport workers have been given a list of names to watch out for. Miles?
I mean, first of all, do investigators have the sense that there were perhaps some thwarted efforts on Tuesday to perhaps hijack other planes and engage in attacks on other targets?
Absolutely, they do. And as you know, some precautions have been made. Defense Secretary Rumsfeld says that they have fighter planes on alert to go into the sky if they do detect any kind of unusual movement of any planes that subsequently do take off. Those New York airports, were open just very briefly, and once these people were detained, they closed down very quickly. National, as well, in Washington, still remains closed. And we're starting to hear some reports of incidents perhaps in other airports across the country. Also, you know, there is the security measure that was taken by the White House in putting the Vice President, Dick Cheney, up at the Camp David. It's very clear that federal authorities are being very cautious in the reopening of these airports, and that they do believe perhaps that there are other members of this group, other members associated with this plot, that still could be out there and still could be planning other things. Miles?
Given the number of suspects, the number of locations, initially it might strike one as kind of odd that intelligence personnel didn't have some indication this might have been brewing, but I suppose it is possible that each of these distinct units didn't know about the others.
Absolutely, and federal law enforcement sources tell me that they are increasingly working under the assumption that many of these groups did not know each other, that there was some signals that, some overt signals that would happen on the aircraft. You know, one of the things, Miles, that's so important about getting those flight data recorders isn't just about what happened on the plane. It's also what the hijackers might have said about other plans. As you know, we heard that was reported an air traffic control conversation on that flight that crashed in Pennsylvania. The microphone was left open. We heard that one of the hijackers was heard to say that they had other planes and they had other targets. Federal law enforcement very interested in talking to all those people that had cell phone conversations with families. Also looking at these flight data recorders. They want to know, did the hijackers talk about any other targets, about any other groups, any other airports that those groups might have been working out of? Miles?
All right, CNN's Eileen O'Connor reporting to Washington from us. Those cockpit voice recorders will, of course, be key as they sift through the rubble trying to find that information. What will be interesting to see is if these hijackers, who admittedly, apparently, were very sophisticated, were able to disable those cockpit voice recorders. That information will be crucial. Hopefully there'll be something on those tapes. Now, the White House and Congress have cut a deal to provide $40 billion in emergency aid to help New York and Virginia recover from Tuesday's attacks. On Capitol Hill this morning, CNN's Kate Snow with more on that. Kate?
Good morning, Miles. Congress today expects to vote on this emergency spending bill. Late last night, the Speaker of the House was meeting with Mitch Daniels, the economic advisor from the White House, and also the two senators from New York, trying to work out some of the language of this $40 billion bill. The White House, according to sources, wanted unfettered access to all that money so they could spend it as they see fit. Some on Capitol Hill are a little concerned about that. They want more control over this money. But the bottom line is, yes, it will be for $40 billion.
We'll vote today or early this morning to appropriate this emergency supplemental. It's essentially $40 billion, $10 billion to be used for intelligence and defense purposes, $10 additional billion which will be used at the discretion of the president, who will have 15 days in which to submit to Congress his list of requirements, and then $20 billion to what you would call local aid to New York, Virginia, and Pennsylvania to cover their costs as it relates to the domestic expenses, public safety, humanitarian, the search and rescue missions that we are watching the images of on CNN all day.
Now, ironically, much of the detail of this language and this bill was worked out on the east lawn of the Capitol yesterday. You see here members evacuating the Capitol. This happened last evening as negotiations had been going on about the budget and about this emergency spending bill. The Capitol evacuated for about 15 minutes. There was a suspicious package that had been found on the Senate side of the building. It was a false alarm. After the evacuation, the members were allowed to go back inside, and they just had a chance, though, to talk while they were outside here on the lawn. And at that point, we're told that they were talking about these figures. They were talking about the $40 billion. And Miles, just to give you a little perspective on how much money we're talking about here, on Tuesday, before the attacks ever occurred, the House was set to take up a measure regarding defense spending. This is what they were going to do on Tuesday. And there was $18 billion in that bill that the president wanted to spend on defense that everyone was arguing about. They were very concerned. There were some Democrats who said it would break the budget. Miles, that's $18 billion they were arguing about. Now they're going to spend twice that much in one day, and that's just an initial figure to get some help and some relief. Miles.
As Minority Leader Dick Gephardt said yesterday, this is not the time to talk about the budget, but eventually the bills are going to have to be paid. When will the day of reckoning occur, Kate?
All we can tell you, Miles, is not yet. I've talked to a lot of members about this, and they keep saying, look, right now we're unified. Right now we're working on matters of absolute urgency. Down the road, we can worry about the accounting. Miles.
CNN's Kate Snow on Capitol Hill. Thank you very much. If you have a question for CNN, we invite you to head to our website. It is located at CNN.com, the AOL keyword, CNN. Just click on Questions under the Resources tab. Fill in your question, and then it will get to us, and watch for the answer right here on CNN as we continue our coverage. Back to Paula in New York.
Thanks so much, Miles. I wanted to show you a picture now of what the rescue efforts look like at this hour. I mentioned earlier on those efforts were suspended for a short time in the middle of the night after some severe thunderstorms rolled through here. Obviously, great concern that these high cranes that are being used in these efforts would make some powerful lightning rods. But the painstaking process is back on at a time when the mayor of this city is confirming that some 90 bomb threats were reported in the city, all over the city yesterday, all of them false. Schools back open here today. The markets, of course, major markets closed today, expected to open again on Monday. All of the major airports here closed again today. The president, of course, expecting to arrive after the national prayer service that will be conducted at the National Cathedral in Washington. I wanted to show you some pictures now of how Europeans are observing what the president has called for today, a day of prayer and remembrance. This is the cathedral you might remember where Princess Diana and Prince Charles were married. I am told the cathedral was absolutely packed. This is the kind of support you're seeing all over Europe this morning. There have been prayer services in Croatia and Albania. And at one point early this morning at 6 a.m. Eastern Time, New York, citizens of most Eastern and Western European nations observed 3 minutes of silence to honor the many innocent victims of these multiple terrorist attacks. Let's pause for a moment. This will be a scene repeated throughout the world today. At noon here in the United States, you can expect to hear a pealing of church bells from coast to coast. The president has asked Americans to leave their jobs at noon to try to get to their places of worship, whether it's a mosque, a synagogue, a church, to show support for the many thousands of people missing and those that we know are dead. One of the companies we expect to be most affected by all this is the Cantor Fitzgerald firm. This is a firm that was involved with bond trading. We know that 1,000 of the 2,300 people that work for the firm were on the top 4 floors of one of those World Trade Center towers. It appears now that the group may have lost hundreds of employees in Tuesday's attacks. Peter Viles, one of our correspondents, is taking a look now at the desperate search for survivors and talking about the horror that many families are experiencing this morning as they deal with the cold, harsh reality of what has been handed them. Let's listen.
It is the saddest vigil you can imagine. Scott Hazelcorn's parents.
It's not even revenge. I mean, I just want to hear my son's voice.
Members of Jun Koo Kang's church.
We all pray every night.
John Perconti's wife, expecting their child in December.
He called me at 10 to 9 and said, our building has just been hit by a plane, turn on the news. And I changed the channel and I saw what happened. And I said, oh God, John, please get out of there safely. And he said, I love you, I have to go.
What links these stories is that all the missing worked at Cantor Fitzgerald, all above the 100th floor of the North Tower, the first one hit. Cantor is not a glamorous firm, but it is crucial. One of the world's largest bond trading firms. 1,000 people worked up there. Fewer than 300 are accounted for, but it is not clear any of those now safe were on the top floors Tuesday morning.
I don't think anybody got out at this point, but we pray for miracles.
Scott Hazelcorn's parents suspect that their son did not run for his life.
He didn't care about himself. He only cared about
We said
his friends.
if Scott was there and he was getting out, he'd probably help everybody out in front of him. That's the kind of kid he was.
They gather at a city-designated center for relatives of the missing on 26th Street, where trees have become pleas for help. And further uptown at the Pierre Hotel, a gathering site for Cantor Fitzgerald families.
I don't think the company has the information that we need. I think they're sharing everything they know, but we have not heard of one survivor. We've not been able to validate any stories that we've heard.
There are official clearinghouses for information on the missing, and Cantor Fitzgerald is using them, but these friends and family members are convinced that any extra effort they can make on behalf of their loved ones is worth making. Peter Weil, CNN Financial News, New York.
Across the country, Americans are finding ways to express their grief and their support for the victims of Tuesday's attack. Crowds turned out in Brooklyn last night for a candlelight vigil for the victims. Chicago showed its support by lighting up the Merchandise Mart in red, white, and blue. A Red Cross blood drive is scheduled to begin there in just a couple of hours. The cast of the hit Broadway musical The Producers made a curtain call to the tune of God Bless America last night. The performance was dedicated to those who died in the attack and their loved ones. Theaters on Broadway dimmed their marquees in honor of the victims. As we bring you images from across America this morning on how we are all coping with this tragedy, we'd like to stop now and show you those at the heart of the rescue operation. It reminds us that we are all affected.
Just a reminder that, of course, we will be covering that prayer service at the National Cathedral live. The president will be there. After that is over, he will come here to New York, where he will meet with a number of paramedics and other rescue workers who are working around the clock in hopes of finding people who are still trapped alive in the wreckage of what is left of the World Trade Centers. Very quickly here, I want to bring you up to date on some of the latest developments. Here is what we know at this hour. At the Pentagon, both flight data recorders, or so-called black boxes from the hijacked plane, have been found. In the search for those responsible for the attacks, the U.S. Coast Guard detains 2 people aboard a Carnival Cruise Line ship off the coast of Miami. The detainees have, quote, a history of hijacking. Also earlier today, sources tell us the White House and Congress struck a deal on a $40 billion emergency aid package for New York and Virginia. That is twice what the president had asked for. The president saying, though, he will spend what it takes to help the folks that were hurt very deeply in these attacks, and the world grieves with the U.S. this morning. Europeans have observed 3 minutes of silence for the victims. Today, the U.S. comes together, as we mentioned earlier on, for a day of prayer and remembrance. More on that a little bit later on. We would like now to correct a report that appeared on CNN based on information from multiple law enforcement sources. CNN reported that Adnan Bukhari and Amir Bukhari of Vero Beach, Florida, were suspected to be 2 of the pilots who crashed planes in the World Trade Center. Well, CNN later learned that Adnan Bukhari is still in Florida, where he was questioned by the FBI. We are sorry for that misinformation. A federal law enforcement source now tells CNN that Bukhari passed an FBI polygraph and is not considered a suspect. Through his attorney, Bukhari says that he is helping authorities. Amir Bukhari died in a small plane crash earlier this year, or actually last year. Miles, before I hand this completely over to you, I wanted to share with you a little piece of information we've just learned, and it's positive. Miles, did you see that piece on the horrible toll this has taken of the Cantor Fitzgerald Bond Company?
I did,
yeah, we have just learned that Morgan Stanley had the largest number of employees, we think, employed in that building, and at this hour, fewer than 50 are missing. And one of the more poignant twists of this story, the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, Howard Lutnick, he was the man who was expected to find out that several hundred of his workers are missing, actually survived these attacks. He was walking into the door of the building as the jet hit the second tower, arriving late for work because he had taken his son to school that day. His brother is among those missing.
So many stories of fateful decisions, you know, a few footsteps away from disaster. And we invite for those of you out there who have missing friends or family members and who are desperate to learn more, to send your pictures to us. Missing@cnn.com is the address, and we're going to get those posted on the internet so that those pictures can be shared. There are websites out there as well where this information is being shared. And of course, there are hotlines available in New York, lists at the Armory available as New York tries to piece together what is obviously a very foggy situation, even now on day 4. Elizabeth Cohen, our CNN medical correspondent, is here, is with us now. She is at that Armory in Manhattan, or was at that Armory yesterday. And let's bring her story to you now.
And I have here with me Vinny Kamaj, whose father, Rocco, was in the World Trade Center. And can you tell me where he worked and when your family last heard from him?
My father was a window washer on Tower 2, the observation deck. He worked the rig outside. He last called us at 9:15 a.m. from the 105th floor, where he said there was 200 to 300 people just on that floor waiting for them to be told to head down.
And did he say that he was heading down, or did he feel safe?
He said, don't panic, to my mom. He said, don't get upset. Tell my kids I'm going to be okay, not to worry about it. I'm in God's hands. We're all going to be okay, don't worry.
And tell me why today you're distributing these flyers.
This morning, my mom woke me up early, telling me that his name was on one of the survivor lists on an internet web page, and that we can get the best information from the building behind us, the Armory.
And what happened when you went into the Armory here?
I have a case number. I looked it up to see if my dad was in any of these hospitals, and no luck. No luck yet.
What's in your head now about what you think happened?
I don't know. I know that my father, he wouldn't have just left everyone behind. He would have looked for his workers. He would have helped people out. He did it on the when they bombed it in '93. He helped a pregnant woman down the stairs.
So he was in the building in '93?
Yes, he was. He's been working there since 1973.
Was he scared to go back and work in that building after the '93 bombing?
My father went back the next day. They asked him, because they needed to inspect the outside of the building, and my father knew how to operate the rig, so he brought down all the workers to inspect the building.
If you think your father might be out there somewhere, what would you want to say to him?
I want to tell him that we all miss him. His little nephew, Luke, misses him, and that we're strong. We got hope.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Aaron.
All right, that was CNN's Elizabeth Cohen, an excerpt of an interview she did live yesterday afternoon during our continuing coverage. Today is a national day of prayer and remembrance, but really it transcends the borders of the United States. Let's take a look at some live pictures from St. Paul's Cathedral in London, England, where members of the royal family, the Queen, the Prince, and the others, the Prime Minister, members of Parliament, have packed this cathedral. Margaret Thatcher there, as we see her in the center there. I've packed this cathedral for a prayer service, a remembrance, which began very poignantly with the singing of the Star-Spangled Banner. Here in the U.S., the National Cathedral, Wisconsin Avenue, Northwest Washington, D.C. Live pictures there. A noontime service is planned. The President will be in attendance, as well as members of Congress. Once again, another opportunity to share our grief. The Reverend Nathan D. Baxter is the Dean of the National Cathedral. Dean Baxter, thank you for joining us here on CNN this morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
I am curious. I can only imagine how difficult it would be to come up with a sermon and the proper words to say at this time. How difficult has it been, and what will you say?
Well, actually, Billy Graham, who is very much America's pastor, will be the preacher for the service. I will be leading the prayers, and in the prayers we are gathered together to know that our faith can sustain us in this time of the beginning of our healing. There will be leaders, and we've invited leaders from the Jewish community as well as from the Islamic community who will be offering prayers as well, because the religious faith of America is very diverse. Our president will also be sharing in the prayers as well. So this will be a gathering in which, with the president, we will all be praying for the healing of our nation and for wisdom as we determine the right things to do for our national security.
Well, Dean Baxter, you bring up that issue, and inevitably that leads to the issue of vengeance and retribution. How do you interpret the Bible? How do you interpret your faith as it relates to calls for vengeance?
Well, I believe that vengeance never serves the purpose of ultimate justice or peace. Sometimes we must take actions that will root out those who have acted in evil ways, but at the same time it must be done in a reasoned, measured, and responsible way that asks, how can we do this in such a way that it will ultimately bring security and healing? So therefore, when we pray, when we are mindful of our own faith, and of course many of our national leaders are people of faith, it helps us to be balanced, and it helps us not to respond simply out of anger and out of rage.
That's a tall order that you just put in there, because the enemy that the United States faces is a difficult enemy to pinpoint, and inevitably, yes, as the calls for justice are heard, innocence, it seems, will get in the way. How does religion feel about that? How do you feel about that, Dean Baxter?
Well, I feel that it is always tragic when life is lost, and especially what we would consider innocent life. But that's why, again, our faith keeps reminding us that in our response, we must be measured. And how that happens, we do not always know, but simply to act out of vengeance is something that makes us the evil we deplore. So faith helps us to try to hold a balance when our hearts are hurting so much, when we're grieving so heavily.
As you've been talking, I know you can't see these pictures right now. We've been showing pictures of a candlelight vigil in Washington Square in New York last night. Very dramatic images of people coming together at these times. What are your thoughts on that? Are people responding in a way that in some ways gives you reason for hope?
Yes. Well, you know, there are those who say that America is evil and that's why this is happening. You know, we have a good nation, we have good people, and what we see in the face of this evil is all of the goodness that also has come forward. People standing together across religious and ethnic and racial lines, people coming together as volunteers and emergency workers, risking their own lives to help others, reaching out to their neighbors and strangers. I think that the other side of the tragedy that we are experiencing is the coming forth of the goodness in the spirit of many, many people in these United States.
Of course, it's terribly unfortunate that we sometimes have to go through something like this, not that we've been through anything like this before, to see the goodness in people. I'm curious what your thoughts are as time goes on, as the initial shock wears off and people perhaps face the reality of this a little more. What will faith hold for them?
I think what it holds for all of us is, first of all, we will have to feel the pain. And I don't think we fully feel the pain yet because we're still somewhat stunned. And the news of the tragic loss of life will continue to unfold in the weeks ahead. So we will have to feel the pain to heal our grief. But also, I think it is understanding that as it is for people in many other parts of the world, life will not be the same for us. But we must go on living and not allow fear to cripple us. And that's what faith does. It helps us, whatever our religious background, faith helps us to cope with fear and to live life freely even when we feel somewhat threatened.
The Very Reverend Nathan D. Baxter is the Dean of the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much for sharing some time with us this day, Dean Baxter, and I wish you well in your service, which CNN will bring to you live at 11:35 a.m. Eastern Time. The National Cathedral Prayer Service. The Reverend Nathan Baxter, the Dean, will be leading that service. The Reverend Billy Graham there, of course, the President, Cabinet, members of Congress. It will be a moving moment which we will share with you. Let's send it back to Paula in New York.
Thanks so much, Miles. One of the things we wanted to focus in on now are some of the reports coming from all over the country of harassment against people of Middle Eastern and South Asian descent, or even those who actually just appear to be. They are increasingly becoming targets of this kind of harassment and violence by civilians. There have been reports of this happening from Texas to Chicago to Long Island. There have been reports of arson, personal attacks, and the police stopping men in Middle Eastern-style head coverings. A firebombing of a mosque in Denton, Texas, and attacks on 2 others are among those incidents. No one was hurt in the Texas attacks. Muslim-owned stores had been vandalized and their owners threatened. Joining you right now is Hussein Ibish, who is a spokesman for the Anti-Arab Discrimination Committee. Thanks for joining us this morning, sir. What else can you tell us about this wave of attacks?
Well, I think the first thing I'd like to say is that Arab Americans were certainly among the victims of this horrible crime that was committed on Tuesday. There were several hundred Arab Americans working in the World Trade Center, and we have all been attacked, all of us as Americans. Now, unfortunately, as you're pointing out, some of our fellow citizens are turning towards those of us of Arab ethnicity or Islamic faith and pointing the finger of culpability in our direction simply because of our ethnicity or our religious identity. It's very unfortunate. One of the most serious attacks, I think, was a shooting in Indiana. Masked men entered a gas station and opened fire onto Yemeni American clerks there, and thankfully they were behind bulletproof glass, and so they weren't hurt, but I think it was kind of very fortunate. that they weren't hurt. And what I can tell you about the attacks is that we had over 30 documented cases of physical violence on Wednesday alone. Yesterday, the number of attacks became, I think, countless, and we're still working very hard to corroborate and tally those attacks. But basically, people are being harassed and assaulted and beaten all over the country. No one has died yet, and I certainly hope that that doesn't happen. But it's still the case that too many Americans are channeling their understandable rage, a rage we all feel, against fellow citizens at a time when we should all be coming together to deal with this national nightmare.
Let me ask you this. Secretary of State Colin Powell said yesterday, publicly for the first time, that Osama bin Laden is a prime target for these multiple terrorist attacks. Is there any indication that, although that has been vastly speculated, that that has led to any increase in this kind of attacks overnight?
No, I don't think that it hinges upon what government officials say or don't say. I think it comes out of, I think these attacks are spontaneous. I think they come out of the anger that we all feel, and some people, unfortunately, don't know how to focus their anger and have given way to raw prejudice and blind hatred. But I think that what is more significant is that many government officials and other prominent Americans have spoken out against these attacks. The Senate passed a resolution yesterday condemning attacks on Arab Americans. The President, the Secretary of State, the Mayor of New York, and the Attorney General have all spoken out against these attacks, and many other prominent Americans as well. So at the same time, we've been on the receiving end of a wave of hatred while we, like other Americans, are trying to cope with this nightmare. We've also been on the receiving end of a tremendous wave of compassion. We've received as many messages of reassurance and of compassion as we have death threats and threats of violence. So at the moment, there are sort of two competing Americas. An America which in some cases lashes out in blind hatred, but there's also the compassionate America, the tolerant America, and I think that in the end, and it's already happening, that the better angels of our nature will triumph, and that we will be able to unite as a nation.
There has been a lot of talk over the last couple of days as to what extent U.S. policy in the Middle East might have played some role in this. Do you believe that is what made America more vulnerable to attack by terrorists?
Well, look, first thing that has to be said is that nothing can justify an attack like this. I mean, we have been viciously attacked, and innocent people have been slaughtered on a mass scale. That said, I mean, I do think that the motivation has its roots in American policies, in American behavior, in the perceptions of some people of an unfairness of the United States. But, you know, I mean, I think that that perception is held by many people around the world, including in the Middle East, and by many Americans as well.
All right,
but
so
most
Mr.
people,
Hussain,
hold on,
hang on 1 second. So it wouldn't surprise you then, in an interview with King Abdullah that I had 2 days ago, that he said, had some sort of peace accord been reached in July of the year 2000, this might not have happened.
Oh, I don't think so. I don't think that this is really rooted in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I think if it is the handiwork of Mr. bin Laden and people like him based in Afghanistan, then it's probably much more linked to the American presence in the Persian Gulf and the American military presence and the role the United States plays in the Persian Gulf region, and not very much to do with the Israeli-Palestinian issue. The point is that you know, there's nothing that can justify these attacks. At a certain point, we probably do need to revisit our policies, but I think that, you know, we have to separate a criminal act which might be motivated by some objection to our policies, and real criticism of the policies that are legitimate. And there's a world of difference between the two, and we can't just lump it all together.
We're going to have to leave it there for this morning. Hussain Ibish, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate your dropping by.
It's great to see you again. Thanks.
Wanted to quickly bring you up to date on what is happening in New York City at this hour. Rescue efforts underway. The rain, kind of a double-edged sword here. In some ways, it is helping to keep down the dust, but the water is making the ash and debris very slippery. The New York City sanitation crews have been making a big push to clean the Wall Street area for Monday's reopening of the stock market. There, of course, will be limited bond trading resumed yesterday. Most of the major markets expected to open on Monday. One of the things we continue to see in New York City is the outpouring of support of New Yorkers who want to help in any way they can. Joining us right now is Michael Oku, one of our CNN correspondents, who is down at the Jacob Javits Center, where I understand many hundreds of people are lined up to do what they can to pitch in. Tell us about that, Michael.
That's right, Paula. It's amazing. Day number 4 and the nightmare continues. And one of the things that makes it a little bit more palatable to digest, if you can even